Okay.
That's why I'm always hesitant. I want to go over there. I've never been funny.
All right, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us both in person and in our virtual audience. Tonight we are so excited to present award-winning author, producer, director, and activist Kirkus Chin, who will discuss what Lisa Ko calls his vivid, moving, funny, and heartfelt memoir, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. Kirkus will be in conversation tonight with Left Bank Books' own events coordinator, Shane Mullen. Some notes before we begin tonight. This event is only possible because of your support. When you shop Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into your local economy. It helps writers get the support that they deserve and allows us to produce events such as this. So thank you all for shopping local and supporting this event. Those of you joining us from afar, we welcome you as well. You will be able to participate in the Q&A at the end of the night by typing your question as a comment on YouTube there. So we have a fantastic calendar of new events coming your way. Of note, next week, February 14th, St. Louis area author Raphael Frumkin will discuss his newest book, Bugsy and Other Stories, a wildly imaginative story collection about queerness, neurodivergence, sexuality, and self-discovery. We have some other upcoming authors such as Amy Spalding, Nate Powell, and Philip B. Williams, as well as many others. You can find the full calendar on our website. There is sure to be something for everybody. For tonight's event, we're delighted to be joined by Kirkus Chin, a co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop in New York City. He served as the nonprofit's first executive director. He then went on to write for network television before transitioning to social justice documentaries. Kirkus has screened his films at over 600 venues, in 16 countries. He has written for CNN, Appétit, and the Boston Globe's Emancipator. A graduate of University of Michigan and a former visiting scholar at New York University, he has received awards from ABC and Disney Television, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts, and more. His new book, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. 1980s Detroit was a volatile place to live, but above the fray stood a safe haven, Chung's Cantonese cuisine, where anyone, from the city's first black mayor to the local drag queens, from a big-time Hollywood star to elderly Jewish couples, could sit down for a warm, home-cooked meal. Here was where, beneath the bright red awning and surrounded by his multi-generational family, filmmaker and activist Kirkus Chin came of age, where he learned to embrace his identity as a gay ABC, or American-born Chinese, where he navigated the divided city's spiraling misfortunes, and where, between helpings of almond, boneless chicken, sweet and sour pork, and some of his own less savory culinary concoctions, he realized just how much he had to offer the world, his beloved family, and himself. Please join me in welcoming Kirkus Chin and Shane Mullen.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi. Do we want to start with the reading?
Sure. Only one edit to my bio. Please say the national champion, University of Michigan. Yeah, so this is my memoir. It's called Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. And as the title implies, I grew up in a Chinese restaurant, but not just any Chinese restaurant. I like to think of it as the Chinese restaurant in Detroit. I usually start by asking people to guess how many egg rolls we sold in the 65 years. You engineering people, you guys should probably do it.
Oh gosh.
65 years, how many egg rolls did we sell?
I'm trying to think. Are there 3 in a serving?
2.
Two in a serving?
Two serving. So let me just give them 100 people. Let's maybe give them 200 egg rolls a night. At least.
Oh goodness, math.
300.
And
That's
the mix
$700,000 a year.
and the mix of
$700,000 a
your
year times
customers,
65, so
mainly
42 million.
white.
That sounds about right.
How much?
We just came up with 42 million.
42 million? No, we sold 10 million.
10 million. Okay.
That was pretty close.
Oh, so you came up with
Nice.
9
Very
million.
good.
That's
I
pretty
didn't
good.
use calculator.
Boy.
I would not have come up with this.
If I were in Michigan, I'd be asking for those degrees back.
Oh, yeah.
We must have missed a factor of 10 in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
No.
what we did.
We sold about 4,000 a week. So about 500 a day or something like that. Yeah, which is a good amount. So it was a really, really popular Chinese restaurant, despite Detroit having these difficulties, right? The auto industry was struggling back then. Crack cocaine, AIDS. I knew 5 people murdered by the time I was 18 years old. But despite that, we had this really wonderful Chinese restaurant in the inner city of Detroit, in the Cass Corridor, where my family was able to raise me and my 5 siblings and, teach us the life skills necessary to sort of move on and have these great lives. And so for me, writing the book isn't just retracing my own journey, but it's also a thank you to my parents for giving me me and my siblings, these wonderful opportunities in life. And also a hat tip to my hometown of Detroit, because I feel like it still gets a really bad rep. And so I wanted to show that Detroit is still capable of producing great things, like me. So I'm going to read a little bit from the prologue before we get into a conversation. The book is structured into 3 sections of 8 stories each. 8 stories in elementary school, 8 in high school, and then 8 in college. But I start off the prologue actually talking about my family's journey to Michigan. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is oftentimes when you read stories about the Asian American experience, it's all centered in California, the West Coast, or maybe New York, but rarely do you think about us being here in the Midwest. And so I really wanted to talk about that. The second reason is that I don't think you can know a person's journey unless you know the family's history and how they got there. And so that's why I decided to write the prologue about my family. So if you'll indulge me, I'll start and read off a little bit from that. Everything I learned in a Chinese restaurant. Welcome to Chung's. Is this for here to go? Armed with a smile and a red waiter's jacket with a perpetual plum sauce stain. That's how my dad greeted any new face who entered the lobby of our popular Chinese restaurant in Detroit. Interestingly, my great-great-grandpa, Gong Li Chin, had faced the same question in the late 1800s as he stood cold and alone on a rickety dock in Guangzhou, China, trying to decide his future and that of his young impoverished family. For here to go. For here to go, as I got older, it was a question I asked myself. Standing in our restaurant's long and open back kitchen, where my family made some of our most popular items, including the tangiest barbecue pork and best-smelling almond cookies, my mom taught me my first lessons. Before diving into math, English, and geography, she began with a little American history, tales of elders and ancestors, our family as prologue. And so the prologue follows my family's journey, starting with Gong Li Chin, how he moved from Canton, China to Canton, Ohio, before realizing there weren't actually Chinese people there, and then moving up to Detroit. Tried to get a job in the growing auto industry, but because he didn't speak English, couldn't land a job. Eventually started working as in the hand laundries, saved up enough money to open up his own laundry and then his own grocery store. And in 1940, he went into the restaurant business. He actually opened up another one in 1939, but the one that I grew up in, was in 1940, Chung's Cantonese Cuisine, and it was instantly a hit. Very, very popular. Everybody went there, from blacks to whites to rich, poor, Christian, Jewish. I like to say we took anybody's money, basically. And so it was a really popular place. The prologue continues all the way to 1967. At the time, the U.S. was having a lot of racial strife. Cities were burning down. Detroit got hit particularly bad. National Guard was called in. And for 5 days straight, my parents actually had to close the restaurant. And in that time period, my parents managed to find time to have sex. And 9 months later, I was born as their riot baby. And so people sometimes ask me, why do I talk about racial justice so much? I always say, oh, well, without that incident, I probably wouldn't be around. So it's kind of in my DNA. And so that's the book. As mentioned, it came out October 17th. I did about 50 readings before that, including 5 in Europe. I did another 70 events between October to December. And then this spring, I'll do another 100 events. So it's been really great. I just did an event earlier today at Washington University. That's why I'm actually out here in St. Louis. They brought me out to speak to some of the classes there. I thought, hey, I'm in town already. I have a free night. I could either sit in the hotel, or I could try to see if there's people here in the community that might want to come out to a reading. So thank you for coming out and spending time with me. In terms of the press, we've gotten a lot of press. Time Magazine excerpted it. CBS Saturday News came back to Detroit with me, did a nice 8-minute segment. NBC News actually went back with me to the restaurant because we closed it. And it was very emotional to go back to the restaurant. I'm going back to NBC News on February 15th. PBS NewsHour just did an interview with me that I think is going to air next week. It's been getting a lot of great press. And so happy to be here in St. Louis with you all.
So I have read the book, which is fantastic when you ask if I want to be a conversation partner.
Yeah.
Glad I was prepared, even if I didn't have any questions.
Yeah.
But one of my questions relating to the praise, because I love this book. I typically am reading novels, reading short stories, and reading Bugsy, which is our event next week. But I don't typically read memoir.
Yeah.
And even though, like, especially queer memoirs, like, I feel like I have read enough of those, like a ton of those, not enough, there's never enough. There's never enough books. But I read a ton when I was like coming out and when I was like kind of first becoming a homosexual. And it helped me become comfortable with who I am, but now like a lot of them are for those type of like coming out stories. But yours did so much more and talks about race and talks about culture and food. Love talking about food. So I can see why this book is hitting with so many different communities, so many different people, and why so many people love this book. Big fan of Lisa Coe.
Yeah.
You have a lot of really fantastic blurbs. How did you get those for this book?
Because I started this group called the Asian American Writers Workshop. For people who don't know it, it's almost like a who's who of Asian American literature. It's a nonprofit that we founded right after I graduated college from U of M. My goal was to move to New York and become a writer, but I didn't feel like there were a lot of resources for me. And so I just started connecting with as many writers. Like I'd go to book readings, and if I saw an Asian American writer, I'd be like, hey, do you want to start workshopping our things together? And so at this point, it's like, I can just rattle off like some names if you want me to name drop. Like on the board, Minjin Lee is on the board. Hua Su, who just won the Pulitzer, is on the board. Ocean Bong had his first reading with our group. Alexander Chi was on staff. Hanya Yanagihara edited our journal. Lisa Coe was an editor in the journal. Kathy Park Hong also was an intern. It's like name an Asian American writer, and they probably, went through the organization. I mean, it's that fabulous of a space. And it wasn't my doing. I think it was just this hunger from Asian American writers at that time to connect with each other and find and create a supportive atmosphere. And so, I sort of just tapped into that network of those people, which is great and so supportive.
I do feel like we are really hitting a peak, or not. Again, I'm using the wrong words because I wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
I feel like there have been so many Asian American memoirs coming out that it is really delightful to see so many stories being told, and especially your memoir showing this perspective and showing a perspective from the 80s when I was also growing up. So there's a lot of connections that I made to the book. Diana Ross, the International Mail magazine, trying to think of some of the other really fantastic.
Alex B. Keaton.
Yeah.
I really wanted to do that with this book because I felt like, I feel like sometimes you read books by Asian Americans or other people of color, and sometimes it seems like it's like this separated world, right? But I really wanted to tie my book into what was happening in mainstream America too, so that if you aren't a person of color, if you're not Asian American, you read it, that you would understand where you were. So there's a lot of Detroit history in there, like when Hudson's department store closed, or when the Tigers won the World Series. There are all these touchstones, in American history that are in the book, so that you can immediately have a sense of where you fit in with that placement. And so I think that hopefully will help connect the reader to that moment themselves.
So since you've been on tour, you've been meeting people who I'm certain have not read the book yet, people who are very eager to read the book, but I'm certain you've met people who have read the book.
Yeah.
What is the best, worst, wildest, what experience has really stood out in your mind from meeting someone who has already read the book?
Well, easily, the story that I love to share is that, so my family ran this restaurant, right? And it was open since 1940 by my great-grandfather. So we have these generations of people that have been coming to our restaurant. And so I was doing a reading in Cambridge at Porter Square Books. It was a totally packed event there. At the end, this woman gets up. She's maybe at 50, 60 or something like that. And she asks the audience, she's like, oh, has anybody here eaten at Chung's? And nobody has, because we're in Massachusetts. But she said, I'm originally from Detroit. I love that place. My family used to go there every Sunday, you know, and her mom has dementia now. And when she told her mom that she was going to the book signing by one of the kids from Chung's, her mom immediately started, you know, recalling all these vivid details about our restaurant and the food, specifically like the egg rolls and things like that. And she said, for the first time in years, she felt like she had her mom back, you know, which is really, really nice. And I think that, like, you know, growing up, I always knew that our restaurant was special. I mean, you know, because people would be coming in, it'd make all these best of lists in Detroit. You know, people would be coming home. All the people that moved away from Detroit, every time they'd come back, they said like, oh, I had to come back to Chung's, you know, on my return visit. So I knew that it was special for a lot of people, but I never understood the depths of how, you know, people sometimes, you know, like incorporate your family's restaurant into their orientation and their worldview and like their lives and how special it is. And so that just made me appreciate the restaurant life more, but even more so my parents, you know, and what they were doing and the work that they were doing as, you know, as restaurant owners, because we don't oftentimes think of people in these fields as heroes, as people worthy of, like, you know, having, you know, done important things. But I think that restaurant owners do important things, right? They bring people together, they help, you know, help people grow up, you know, they help families celebrate, you know, all these really, really wonderful things. So I think meeting all these former customers has given me a greater appreciation of my family and the work that they do.
You talk about one celebrity.
Mm.
Do you talk about more than one celebrity? No, just
In the book,
yeah.
I
In the
name
restaurant.
drop, but I only do one as a story.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. Did you? I guess I might be forgetting the name dropping.
Joni Mitchell, Smokey Robinson,
Okay.
Earl of Snowden, like big names of people. McCarthy ate there, like, you know, Eugene McCarthy, like the senator, like crazy. It was like the place. Well, because all the restaurants, I mean, all the hotels in downtown Detroit would always recommend our place, right, to go, which is kind of interesting. This isn't in the book, but like, because our food is very Chinese American, and so whenever you'd have Asian people coming into Detroit for whatever reason, and then the hotel people would send them to our place, you could see that they're a little disappointed because there wasn't, you know, it wasn't traditional Chinese cooking. Hey, welcome.
There's the cat. Orleans.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. But I do talk about Yul Brynner coming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you coming up? Okay, come on. He only wants to sit on my lap when I'm talking to another. When did you decide to write the memoir versus some other medium? Because you have played with a lot of mediums. So I'm wondering when you knew that this was a book and a really good book.
Well, for me, I started writing it. I actually have made a shift in my career. So like I was, well, I started off as a poet, but then I switched into TV writing. So I was doing TV writing. And then sadly, my parents were in a car accident back home in Detroit, and my dad passed away. And I was the one who had to go home and sell the family business and take care of everything. And it's at that point I switched over to do more, you know, more personal pieces about Detroit, my family, and things like that. So it's sort of coming out of that. You know, I originally started writing for my nieces and nephews because I felt like, oh my God, because they were being born in California, I felt like, oh my God, our family has this long 100-year history of being in the Midwest that they're not going to know anything about. And so I originally started writing it for them. So.
Did you journal a lot going into the process? Did you talk to friends from the period?
No, the main person I talked to was my mom, because it was really important for me to write the book. And so if you don't mind, maybe I can read, you know, the piece that I feel like is for my mom.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so setting this up again, this is the 80s. It was a very difficult time period to be a gay person because of AIDS. And I literally thought I'd be dead by the age of 30, right? Because of everything I'd seen in Detroit, all the murders and everything. My senior year was like, one of the gruesome murders was we had this one customer named Dr. Alan Canty. Came in, told us he was like ER doctor. It turned out he was a famous psychiatrist who would come to our neighborhood, the Red Light District, to hire prostitutes. He was gonna call it off with this one girl that he'd spent a lot of money on. The pimp got so upset that he took a baseball bat and bashed his head and killed him, and then chopped up his body with a Ginsu knife and then littered it all the way up I-75. Yeah, I know, that's my senior year. My freshman year was the Vincent Chin murder, which you guys probably know about, But anyway, so I didn't understand the point of going to college. I thought I'd be dead by the age of 30. I was like, what is the point of, sitting in a classroom for 4 more years when I'd probably be dead by the end of the decade? But my mom, who had a really tough life, she never even got to graduate high school. She had an arranged marriage. She was sent from China, to America, knew nothing about it, the country, the city, and she hated, that restaurant. She actually used to always say, like, who did I kill in a previous life to deserve this? That was the thing she kept saying as a kid. And so she really wanted us to go focus on education. So her mantra to us growing up was work hard, obey your parent, obey the elders, and be quiet, right? And so she just really hounded us going into school. And so I finally rationalized, like, what would be giving up 4 years of my life for a woman who's given up her whole life for me in terms of going to college? And so I made a deal with her. I said, okay, Mom, I'll apply to one college, and if I don't get in, then I'm not going. So pick wisely. And so she said, okay, fine, you're applying to Michigan. And sadly, I got in. So I went to Michigan. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was one of those students that, had to work during the day. I went to school at night. But at night, they actually have a lot of writing classes, right, at 6 o'clock. And so I signed up for poetry classes. Doing the math, I calculated that if I wrote haikus, I could graduate in fewer than 500 words. That was my whole rationale for being a writer. And so I think I did well enough that I got into the creative writing program there. And they only took about 20 students in, so it's a pretty selective program. So I'm going to read a story from that section. One thing is that the chapter titles may not make sense, but it's like a Chinese menu. So this is chapter M7. Okay. Took out my glasses. I probably don't need to hold this, right? Good. Okay, good. M7. Being a creative writing major made me the literary expert at Chung's. That was inevitable, as my dad asked every customer, "Have you met our number 3? He's the writer in the family." Every time he mentioned my program, the number of students accepted got smaller and smaller. At some point, I expected him to say I was the only one on campus even allowed to own a pen. One week, one of our waiters was out sick. My younger siblings were busy with their weekend activities, so I was the one called in to help. I jumped at the chance to have some home-cooked meals for a few days. I was running around the dining room, refreshing our customers' silver teapots, when a white middle-aged woman reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a colorful hardcover. "Have you read this book? It's so good." The Joy Luck Club, the recently released novel that featured a bunch of old sassy Chinese ladies who like to eat, gossip, and play mahjong, could have easily been set in our back kitchen. Every time I came in to help at the restaurant, another diner, usually older and female, cited the most memorable of characters, lines, and scenes. They all wanted to know if I was working on something similar. I was writing poetry, but they didn't care. To them, all writers were the same. They would squeal, "You could be the next Amy Tan." My mom turned out to be the biggest pusher. She rarely had a book in her hand, but the success of the Joy Luck Club convinced her that her life was a bestseller too. She followed me around the dining room, dropping stories from her childhood, the same ones I'd heard growing up, but now she recounted them as if she was auditioning for her own books on tape. One night, after seeing how our waiters sometimes pooled tips together, my mom shared an oldie. "When the communists marched south, they targeted my family. My uncles and grandpa were rich in America, so the Red Guard called us traitors. My stubborn grandma didn't want to leave her big home, so when my parents escaped to Hong Kong, they left me behind to keep her company. The communists hated me and my pawpaw. When I was 4, they made me watch as they forced my grandma to climb the old banyan tree in our courtyard. Then they pushed her off into a pile of broken glass." For visual, my mom rubbed her knees. Another time, standing at the water station, she launched into her own nautical tale. "When I was 5, my uncle in America paid $25,000 in renminbi, a king's ransom in people's money, to a local fisherman to ferry our remaining family out of China. After a long ride tucked under the planks of his fishy fishing boat, we came up for air. But we weren't in Hong Kong. The traitor turned us into the authorities. In jail, I had to sing Communist Party songs to earn extra rice for me and my grandma." Another chapter came as we stood beneath a painting of the Chinese countryside. "When my pawpaw and I were freed from jail, we found out that the officials had given away our home to peasants. We were forced to live several villages away in a dirt hut with 3 other families. Whenever we went out for a pail of water, my grandma had to bend low to keep her head below the soldiers. Once again, she gave me a demonstration, this time bowing her head. Granted, my mom's epic saga interested me. Who wouldn't be intrigued by tales of prison cells, guns, and stolen ransoms? Even the parts about her mundane life in Hong Kong after she was reunited with her parents and siblings were amusing. But these were her stories, not mine. She had to tell them, not me. I was in school to find my own voice. I sat and listened, but that was as far as it would go. Toward the end of the summer, as I was at the back table sipping my red pop, stockpiling poems for the upcoming semester, my mom sat down. Before I could say anything, she started talking. I was a top student in Hong Kong. When Pepsi came to town, they held a big contest for students to draw a picture of their own school. Mine was the best at Sacred Heart. I won 6 cases. There were so many bottles, I had to give some to the nuns. I threw down my Parker pen, the one I treated myself to after getting into the program. Yes, and they kept burping all day. It was so funny. Ha ha, you've told me that story over and over. And I don't even like Pepsi. I prefer Coke. My mom's shoulders shriveled. The shine faded from her rosy cheeks. You don't want to hear my story? I tensed up. I do, but I'm behind on my own stuff. Between working at Drake's, the Journal, and Saving the World, my schedule was packed. On top of that, my workshops in the fall were advanced. Still insecure about my place in the program, I put pressure on myself to create more interesting writing by staying up late and scribbling in my notebook every detail of my life. But no matter how hard I tried, working harder could not produce a better poem. My mom lifted herself off her seat. The glint in her eye orphaned me. Her 42 years of life flashed before my eyes. She'd gone from Guangzhou to Hong Kong to Detroit and spent the past 2 decades raising her 6 children in a hostile foreign land. She tried to prove her life had worth, that it hadn't gone unnoticed, and here I was, the ungrateful son, writing it off. Her lips quivered in a soft murmur. I hastily picked up my pen, backtracking. Go ahead, Mom. I'll write it down this time. My mom bowed her head, as if I were one of the soldiers holding a gun to her temple, ordering her to sing. No, you go on. You do your own thing. I reached out my hand, but by then she had disappeared through the black swinging door, leaving only the rattling from the kitchen, the clanging walks and rumbling dishwasher. I sat there upset at myself for being so inconsiderate. Everything I had done in the past 3 years had been for her, but it seemed as though I had failed the final test. My education wasn't just to help me get a better life, it was for my whole family. We were a team. We were the 8 immortals. How could I let them down? I needed to make things right, but I knew that, like most disappointments in our house, apologies were never spoken. Only deeds would bring about reconciliation. So, to read that story. That's it. It's for my mom. So.
So, I think I want to go back to the question of like how did you process this out? So I love the structure. What was the process like for you writing, recounting these memories, recounting some honestly pretty violent things, some very beautiful things? How did you encounter that process?
Well, when I first started writing the book, as I mentioned, it was for my nieces and nephews, and it was just going to be like middle school years, which are happier stories because I'm a dumb kid, and nobody cares if you're a dumb kid. You can do stupid things. But at some point in the writing process, things were happening in America, which made me decide that I needed to shift the age of that, because there was a conversation happening in the country. Specifically, George Floyd had been murdered. There was a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. COVID was happening. And it seemed like the country was having this conversation about identity, intersectionality, racism, the coming out process. All the stuff that I really wasn't thinking about. You know, I was thinking more just about like happy, fun stories about my mean grandmother and my grandfather who ran the Chinese mafia. You know what I mean? Like I thought that was the book. So, you know, but once I decided to write a memoir that's a little bit more, you know, dealing with an older age, I sort of committed myself to it. You know, I think that my strategy in life has always just been to move forward, right? Like no matter what bad things happen, you know, which is different than writing a memoir, right? Because, you know, writing a memoir, it forces you to sort of pick at the scabs of things that have happened. I think as a human being, it's okay to forget things and to not dwell over things and not parse things apart like that happened. but it's the exact opposite when you're a writer, right? So it wasn't comfortable for me to do, but I think that once I committed myself to writing a book, I had to be honest with myself about things, and I didn't know any other way to write a book like that. So it's really been nice that people have said that that I'm pretty honest about things. Like I don't necessarily present myself as the hero in the book. Like I talk about my mistakes and stuff like that. And I think back on like other memoirs that I read afterwards, and yeah, a lot of them, they don't really talk about their, do you know what I mean?
Some of the classic memoirs.
They're kind of nice to themselves. Like they're like, I'm a perfect person and these are all the bad things that
I
happened.
started here and I grew to here.
Yeah, without the stumbling part, it seems. I didn't think about that until I started getting comments from people saying, "Oh, you're pretty honest. You don't hide things about things." And I'm like, well, I didn't know I could. It's a memoir. You're supposed to be in that moment of writing what it was. I mean, like there's this whole storyline in the book where I was a young Republican, right? I was like a senior class president of the National Honor Society. I started the Young Republican Club, the Students Against Smoking. I went to Boys State. Margaret Thatcher was my imaginary girlfriend. Like I was just really, really right wing. And so, you can't laugh at yourself. And what's the point of, I don't know. So, I just thought like, well, if I'm going to be in that moment, I'm not going to filter. I'm old enough to be able to laugh at myself. So yeah, why not?
I think that is. So, the fun question. Who would play you in the televised version of the book?
I actually so people ask me this question a lot, and I used to say like Harry Shum Jr. I don't know if you know who he is.
I do.
Yes. And then my friends would say like, no, who do you want to play you in the movie? Not who do you want to be your boyfriend? It's like,
They can be the same answer.
Yeah, he's really cute. I don't really know. I'm good friends with a guy whose son is an actor who starred in the show Fresh Off the Boat. And so we talked about him playing, me, but I think by the time, if we get lucky enough, I think that it's probably going to be an unknown younger person.
And this is like it's happening right now.
Yeah.
The movie comes out tomorrow. The TV show
Yes.
premieres tomorrow.
Yeah. I don't know who. Yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously some stud, right? Yeah.
All right. Audience questions? I normally.
Well, where'd you go to high school in Detroit?
Our family moved to Troy. By then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we moved up to Southview and then to Troy. So we were one of those families that actually went back and forth between the infamous late line.
Yeah.
So I think that was also a perspective in the book, right? Because a lot of people in Detroit think
That's a lot, like, both sets of my grandparents moved out of Detroit in the mid to late 60s, kind of same thing here.
probably around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my mom was born in 68, so she was also possibly a riot baby. Yeah.
I'm still processing the fact that your mom would graduate the same year. I was born the same year as me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apologies for that one. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'm old.
Well, you're not as old as I am. There you go.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 66.
Oh,
There
okay.
you go.
So 2 years. We're in that same generation.
Any from the virtual audience?
Not yet.
So when you talk to a lot of people who have worked, or like my daughter has worked as a hostess in a restaurant, it's really eye-opening, especially if they weren't actually in the restaurant. Like our daughter didn't come from anyone in our family who had that kind of experience. So, and it seemed like it opened up a lot of eyes, to her in discovering about people, because as we all know, you go to a restaurant and people can be very different from who they really are when they're in a restaurant, right? Whether it be entitlement or all these kind of things. You just witness a lot. So since you learned in a Chinese restaurant, is there anything in particular as this Cantonese family, Chinese, young Chinese kid, or whatever age you work to in the restaurant, that this was the way your society was coming and you were meeting society, right? Aside from your normal day-to-day schools and stuff, is there any particular memory that was like this? I don't want to say it's an aha moment, but just a moment of discovery and wow for you as this Chinese restaurant kid with this outer world, which we know you said could have been any type of person.
No, I feel really equipped, partly because this is my third event today, so I'm trying to remember. Okay, which stories have I told? But I don't think I told this story. Oftentimes people ask me, given the title of the book, what did you learn in that Chinese restaurant, right? And I always say that the first lesson is probably the most important lesson. Was that when you're a little kid, oftentimes your parents will say, "Don't talk to strangers." My parents actually told me the exact opposite. They said, talk to strangers. And who they were talking about were the people sitting in our dining room. Because again, my mom didn't graduate high school. My dad went to community college for 2 semesters before he had to come back and work in the family business. So they didn't really know what opportunities existed for us outside the 4 walls at that Chinese restaurant in the inner city, right? But they knew they had this dining room of people that did. And so anytime my dad met somebody who had an interesting job or just seemed really happy or whatever, he'd call all 6 of his kids to run over and barrage these people with questions of what do you do for a living? How did you get your job? How much money do you make? And that impulse to be able to talk to people who are different than me, but also to not be afraid of asking questions when you don't know something, and most importantly, not to be afraid of asking for help when you need it, are all things that I learned. And so when my family moved from different communities, slowly moving to Troy, which is a upper middle class neighborhood where it was 98% white, I felt comfortable there because I'd met customers who came from Troy and had that background. And so, that ability to, I guess the term is code switch, right? Which is being able to talk to people, because our restaurant really was diverse. I mean, we saw everybody, and during the day, it'd be white collar professionals, and at night, it was literally the people who lived in the neighborhood of the quarter, which was prostitutes, pimps, drug dealers. I mean, and to be able to talk to these people and meet them where they're at one-on-one, I think it's just a gift that, my parents really gave me. I just really appreciate that, yeah, because the whole city did come into our dining room,
Well, that's really interesting because obviously when you're only raised and going to school, you are just given these kind of frameworks for how you might see someone, or you build up these stigmas, these stereotypes, and all this stuff. But It sounds like in your world, at least in the restaurant environment, that you didn't have that put upon you, so that it allowed you to kind of understand what that humanity was.
Yeah.
Good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's very basic lessons my parents would teach us about, when a customer comes in, watch for their actions, watch what they do. Don't judge them on, what they look like or what they're wearing or their skin color or their age. Check out what watch what they're doing. Check if they're scoping out the place. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? So my parents taught me, it's you have to, look at people for who they are, not what you think they are. I mean, it was. That's why I feel really lucky, and it's interesting because in touring, even just with this book, I've gone to some really, I won't name these schools, but some really expensive boarding schools. You know what I mean? Who bring me in to talk to these kids. And actually, one of the kids asked the questions. After I told them my story, he said, do you get jealous over people that grew up with more money than you? And I'm like, oh, you mean everybody in this room? And I said, no, I don't, because I actually loved my childhood. I wouldn't trade it. I mean, I actually had a great childhood. I got all the free food I want. I mean, it was delicious. And my family's there. The only thing I say to people like that is that I would only feel bad if you did not appreciate the privileges that you had and you didn't make the most of the advantages to make the place, to make the world better for people.
Mhm.
That's the only thing that I would feel bad about, wasted opportunity. Because I feel like I've come pretty far from what I started with. And so there's nothing to feel bad about in that sense. Yeah.
Also, my grandparents had a catering company,
Oh, really?
so yeah, I grew up serving.
Oh, did you have to go work at, was it a dining hall, a cater hall?
It
Or?
was an Elks Lodge.
Oh, okay.
Mostly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I grew up like from the time I could look over a counter.
Yeah.
Coffee, tea.
Did you like that?
I mean, I worked in restaurants.
Yeah.
For a long, long time afterwards. So,
Yeah. When I went up to U of M, like my first job was like working behind a desk at the residence hall, and I just hated it because it didn't seem like a job to me. Like unless you're actually running around and sweating, it doesn't seem like work to me.
Yeah.
It's great, right? Like that whole tradition of being, service. I mean, it's really great.
Well, and same where like when I went to college, I was like this is not what we do. Like we don't get English degrees.
Yeah. I say to people that even though I don't work in a Chinese restaurant anymore, I still live my life as a Chinese waiter. I go around asking people, it's like, oh, how can I help you? What can I get for you? And I think that attitude has served me well too, in the sense that it's okay to be kind. It's okay to be nice, to people. If the moments that you have with someone, if you can improve it in some ways or make their experience nicer, then why not go for it, right? And so, again, it's a philosophy that I just sort of, grew up with. So.
And most people treat servers very well and treat them kindly. And you can tell that a person is a terrible person if they don't treat a server well.
Yeah. No, we've had that too. We've had, as you read the book, I've had some really terrible encounters with some of our customers. But it's interesting because if you think about it, the worst customers were like the Oscar-winning actor and this drag queen. It's like totally different people, especially, so you can't judge, say like, oh, it's only rich people that are going to be rude, because other people can be just as rude. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to really look at people for their actions, right?
Yeah.
So.
Don't judge.
You like that?
Any other audience questions? Signing time?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. If you can follow my tour if you want, it's curtisfromdetroit.com. I'm going to Kansas City this weekend for the AWP conference, but then I think I'll be in New York after that. Again, I'll go back to New York, and then Hawaii at the beginning of March. And so, a lot of good stuff on the road. So thank you for hosting here in St. Louis.
Yeah.
So are you only doing writing now? Because you made it, not poetry, but you also did film?
I do films. So I made the film that I made most recently is a film called Dear Corky. It's about a photographer named Corky Lee who photographed New York's Chinatown for 60 odd years, and he sadly caught COVID and passed away. But that film just got licensed by American Masters from PBS. So that is going to debut, I think, in May. And I still do TV stuff. Like I was developing a kids show with PBS. The option runs out at the end of this month, but we've been working on this show for about 3 years. I had another, 1 hour young adult program that I was working with Warner Brothers that got killed after the strike that we just had. It's fine. Between you and me, it's like my heart wasn't in it as much because I was doing so much of publicity for the book. I kept missing deadlines and stuff like that. So I have a couple writing projects, but like film-wise, I play around all the time. I'm not working on a specific doc idea right now, but if something comes along, then, I can pivot to it. Other things that I did this past year, I produced an episode of a podcast for a show called America's Test Kitchen. I'm looking at a dish called almond boneless chicken. I wrote pieces, for journalism pieces, like for the Detroit Free Press and, CNN. So it's a hodgepodge, right? Because when you're a writer, you have to sort of go wherever employment opportunities are. So, okay. Thank you again.
Thank you for
Bye.
coming out.
Okay.
We do have books available for sale at the desk, and we will do signing right up here in just a moment.
Thank you.
Same here.